When everyone doubts, sometimes all it takes is just one person to believe. The whispers began before breakfast. Hermione felt them like a chill that clung to her skin, invisible but inescapable. The great hall buzzed with morning chatter, spoons clinking against porridge bowls, owls swooping in with the post. But beneath it all, there was that low hum, the sound of eyes turning toward her, of hushed tones and pitying looks that burned hotter than any hex. She tried to ignore it. She had, after all, grown used to being talked about. But something in the air was different this time, heavier, more personal. When she reached for her pumpkin juice, she caught Seamus Finnegan's whisper to Dean. "They say she did it. That ritual." Her hand froze mid-air. Ron and Harry exchanged a look she couldn't quite read. She swallowed hard, setting her glass down. "What ritual?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Harry hesitated. "They found something in the restricted section last night. Ancient runes, dark magic, the kind that, well, it messes with protective wards." "And what does that have to do with me?" she asked, though her pulse quickened. Ron shifted uncomfortably. "Your wand. It showed residue from the spell. They checked everyone's." Hermione blinked. "That's impossible. I haven't been near the restricted section in weeks." But no one met her gaze. It was then she felt it, that slow, crawling awareness that the people she trusted most didn't believe her. Not fully. Not anymore. McGonagall called her to her office that afternoon. The evidence was disturbing, she said. The library records, the wand traces, the faint magical signature that matched her own. Hermione argued, pleaded, explained, but each word felt smaller than the last. By evening, she wasn't just Hermione Granger, war heroine and brightest witch of her age. She was Hermione Granger, the accused. The castle, once her refuge, now felt like it was watching her. Corridors whispered as she passed. Students pulled away. Even the portraits seemed to eye her with suspicion. She found herself standing outside the library after hours, her thoughts tangled and sharp. Her mind searched for logic, for proof, for anything that could explain how her name was tied to a ritual she hadn't touched. "Trying to sneak in again, Granger." The voice was smooth, mocking, and unmistakable. Draco Malfoy leaned against the archway, arms crossed, his prefect badge glinting faintly in the torchlight. His eyes flicked over her with that familiar mix of amusement and disdain. "I'm not in the mood, Malfoy," she said tightly. "Of course you're not." His tone was laced with irony. "Bit preoccupied being the school's newest scandal, aren't you?" Her head snapped up, anger flaring. "You think I did it too, then?" He studied her for a moment, something unreadable in his expression. "I think," he said slowly, "you're too clever to get caught if you had." It was not quite an accusation, not quite a defense, somewhere in between. She blinked. "That's hardly a compliment." He shrugged. "Wasn't meant to be." But his eyes lingered a beat too long before he turned away. "Still, I'd stay out of the library tonight. People are jumpy. Wouldn't want to add 'caught lurking where the crime happened' to your list of misfortunes." He started to walk off, his footsteps echoing softly down the corridor. "Wait." The words slipped from her before she could stop it. He paused, half turning, pale hair catching the flicker of torchlight. "Why warn me?" she asked quietly. "You've never cared what happens to me." For a moment, something flickered across his face. something she couldn't name. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual smirk. "Maybe I just don't like easy targets," he said, and walked away. Hermione stood there long after he'd gone, trying to steady her breath. It was absurd. She should hate him. Still did, she told herself. He was a reminder of everything ugly and cruel in her past. Yet there had been something in his tone. Not pity, not mockery. Something colder, deeper, like he understood what it was to be watched, judged, and despised. That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed every word McGonagall had said, every doubtful look from Harry, every whisper that chased her down the hall. Her chest felt tight, her mind spinning with fragments of evidence and betrayal. And somewhere, behind it all, the memory of Draco's voice, the way it had dropped when he'd said easy targets, haunted her more than the accusation itself. By morning, the school had decided she was guilty. By morning, Draco Malfoy was the only one who hadn't. Rain lashed against the castle windows, streaking the glass with silver lines that trembled in the wind. Hermione sat alone in the library, or rather, in what used to be her sanctuary. Now, it felt like a room that had turned its back on her. The shelves loomed higher than usual, their shadows colder, as if the very walls of Hogwarts had joined in doubting her. She spread parchment across the table, quills and ink scattered in messy disarray, a rare state for her. Dozens of references lay open, all circling back to the same point, the traces of the forbidden ritual, ancient magic, older than Hogwarts itself. She'd studied its theory before, only in passing. Never once would she have dared to practice it. Yet the evidence was there, mocking her. The door creaked open. She didn't look up. "I thought I told you not to lurk around crime scenes, Granger." Draco's voice carried its usual drawl, but softer this time. She heard him move closer, his footsteps deliberate and unhurried. Hermione clenched her jaw. "I'm not lurking. I'm researching." He stopped beside her table, looking down at the chaos of parchment. "Researching how to clear your name, or how to actually finish the spell." Her head snapped up. "Do you think this is a joke?" "Everything's a joke," he said, though the words didn't sound like he meant them. "That's the only way to survive around here." "Not everything," she said sharply. "Some of us still care about the truth." He leaned closer, and for a moment she caught the faint scent of rain on his cloak. "Truth," he murmured, as if testing the word. "That's a luxury, Granger. People don't want the truth. They want a story they can believe. And right now, you make a very convenient villain." She looked at him then. Really looked. Pale eyes shadowed by something darker than arrogance. He wasn't taunting her. He was remembering. "You know what it's like," she said quietly, "to be blamed for something you didn't do." His jaw tensed, but he didn't answer. Instead, he turned his gaze to the window. "The difference is, I deserved most of what I got." "That's not true." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You don't get to decide that, Granger." They stood in silence for a while. The rain filled the gaps between words, steady and relentless. Finally, Hermione pushed a parchment toward him. "If you're so sure people believe stories more than truth, then help me find proof. If we can trace the original spell pattern, I can show them it wasn't me." Draco raised an eyebrow. "You want my help?" "I don't want it," she corrected. "I need it." He studied her for a long moment. There was resistance in his posture, years of pride fighting the urge to care. Then he sighed, the sound weary. "Fine. But if anyone asks, this never happened. Hermione almost smiled. Of course. Wouldn't want anyone thinking you've gone soft. He ignored the jab and leaned over the parchment. His hand brushed hers as he pointed to a line of runes, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. She pulled back quickly, pretending to study another note. Draco's lips curved, faintly, knowingly. Hours passed like minutes. They pieced together fragments of magical signatures, comparing them to what the auras had found. The tension between them shifted, unspoken. Less of open hostility now, more of wary curiosity. It wasn't until he muttered an incantation under his breath that a flash of light burst from the parchment, illuminating his pale fingers. Hermione startled. "Careful!" she exclaimed, grabbing his wrist to steady his wand hand. Their palms met, warm against cold. For a second, they froze. The glow faded, but neither moved. Her breath caught. His gaze dropped to where her fingers still rested against his skin. She withdrew slowly, pulse hammering in her throat. "It's a mimic rune," he said finally, voice low. "Someone copied your magical signature. That's why the spell residue points to you." Her eyes widened. "So, I was framed." "Obviously." He gave a half shrug. "Though I suppose you could still be brilliant enough to fake your own innocence." "Malfoy," he smirked. "I'm joking. Mostly." Despite herself, she laughed, softly, nervously. It felt strange hearing her own laughter again after days of dread. For a fleeting instant, there was something almost gentle in his expression. But then it vanished, and he stepped back. "Don't look so relieved, Granger. Proof or not, no one will believe you unless you find the real culprit." "And you'll help me?" He hesitated. "I don't do charity." "This isn't charity," she said. "It's justice." "Justice." He repeated the word like it was foreign, then quieter. "Fine. But remember, I'm not doing this for you." "Then why?" she asked. His eyes met hers, cool and sharp. "Because I'm tired of watching the wrong people burn." Something twisted in her chest at that. Before she could respond, he turned and walked toward the door. When it closed behind him, Hermione exhaled shakily, realizing her hands were trembling. She should have felt triumphant. She'd found an ally, proof that she'd been framed. But instead, she felt unsettled, as if the ground beneath her was shifting. She couldn't decide what unnerved her more, the idea that someone had gone to such lengths to ruin her, or the strange, reluctant kindness in Draco Malfoy's eyes. As the rain eased outside, she sat back in her chair, staring at the parchment that still glowed faintly with runic light. The truth was starting to surface, but so was something else, something she didn't understand yet, something that began and ended with him. The next morning dawned grey and heavy, as if the castle itself could sense the unease coiling through its corridors. Hermione hadn't slept. Her mind was too full, of runes, of suspicions, and of a certain pale-haired boy whose voice still echoed in her thoughts. She told herself it was because of the investigation, because he was helping her now, and she couldn't afford to mistrust him. But that was a lie, and she knew it. She thought of his expression the night before, the shadow of guilt behind his eyes, the way his tone softened just enough to make her forget she was supposed to hate him. When she arrived at the library, Draco was already there, lounging in the same chair as if he owned it. His wand twirled idly between his fingers, his posture careless, but his eyes, sharp and alert, followed her every move. "You're late," he said. "It's 7 in the morning." Hermione muttered, dropping her books onto the table. He smirked. You used to be more punctual. Guilt weighing you down? She shot him a look. You're infuriating. He tilted his head. So, I've been told. For a while, they worked in silence. At least, mostly in silence. He made dry comments about her neat handwriting and her obsessive note-taking. She ignored him, though every jab seemed oddly less venomous than before. There was something almost comfortable about their rhythm, as if constant friction had turned into an unspoken pattern they both needed. Finally, she broke the silence. We need to know who had access to the library after hours last week. There's a charm that records every entry. Draco arched an eyebrow. And how exactly do you plan on getting those records? McGonagall's hardly going to hand them over to a suspected criminal. Hermione's lips curved in a small, dangerous smile. That's where you come in. He leaned back in his chair, feigning surprise. Ah, you want me to use my reputation for evil? How flattering. I want you to distract Filch while I get the records, she said crisply. He blinked. You're asking me to commit a crime with you. You owe me, she said. You're helping, remember? He studied her for a long moment, then chuckled, low, reluctant, genuine. Merlin helped me, Granger. You might actually be dangerous. The plan went smoother than she expected, mostly because Draco was unexpectedly good at it. He intercepted Filch outside the restricted section, feigning an air of irritation about misfiled detention records. The poor caretaker launched into a rant that kept him occupied just long enough for Hermione to slip past the shelves, whisper the unlocking charm, and summon the enchanted ledger. Her hands shook slightly as she flipped through the glowing pages. Dozens of names flickered in golden ink, fading after midnight, until she found what she needed, a single unauthorized entry. The name shimmered faintly in the light. She frowned. No, that can't be right. The ledger read, Hermione Granger. Her pulse quickened. Someone had altered the records. But how? Only a handful of advanced charmcasters could manipulate enchanted logs. And even then, the trace would be near impossible to hide. A noise made her whirl around. Draco slipped through the door, breath uneven, his expression taut. Filch nearly caught me, he muttered, then froze when he saw her face. What happened? They used my name, she said, voice trembling. Someone tampered with the record. He stepped closer. Show me. She handed him the book, and their fingers brushed again. A brief contact, but enough to pull her out of her panic. His gaze moved over the glowing name, and his jaw tightened. This isn't amateur work. Whoever did this knew how to forge magical signatures. Hermione swallowed. So, it had to be someone inside Hogwarts. He met her eyes. Someone who knows you well enough to use your habits against you. Her heart sank. You mean? I mean your friends, your professors, anyone who knows your schedule. Hermione stared at the page, her mind reeling. No, they'd never. Draco's voice cut in, low and bitter. You still think people don't turn when it's convenient? You should know better by now. She looked at him sharply. And what would you know about loyalty, Malfoy? His expression darkened, the old arrogance flaring up like a shield. Enough to know it doesn't last. The words hung between them, sharp, final, cruel. But beneath them, Hermione caught something else, the faintest tremor of pain. She wanted to say something, anything to pierce the wall between them. But before she could, he turned away. We're done here. For today. He left without another word. That evening, Hermione sat by the fire in the empty common room, the flames casting gold light over her open notes. Her thoughts were a storm she couldn't calm. Draco's words had hurt, not because of their cruelty, but because of how much truth hid behind them. He lived surrounded by ghosts of his own choices, and she wondered if he'd ever truly believed in anyone again. She didn't know when she started noticing things about him. The way his hands trembled slightly when he cast intricate spells, or how he avoided eye contact when someone mentioned the war. His arrogance was a mask, but now she could see the cracks in it. When he'd looked at her that morning, there had been something almost pleading in his eyes. Maybe, she thought, he wanted to believe her, not just for her sake, but for his own. And that terrified her, because if she started believing in him, if she started to trust him, she might not be able to stop. The door creaked open. She looked up. Draco stood in the doorway, pale hair damp from the mist outside, his expression unreadable. "I shouldn't be here," he said after a moment. "But I found something." He approached, pulling a folded parchment from his cloak. "This was slipped under my door." She took it, her fingers brushing his. Again that familiar, unwelcome spark. The parchment unfolded itself, revealing an anonymous note in elegant handwriting. "You're getting too close. Leave it, or she takes the fall." Hermione's throat tightened. "They know we're working together." "Seems so." His tone was dry, but his eyes flickered with concern. "You've made enemies, Granger." She looked up at him, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "We've made enemies." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the silence, and something electric hung in the air. Fear, anger, and something else neither of them dared name. Draco's voice softened, just enough to make her chest ache. "Be careful. They'll come after you first." "Then I'll be ready," she said quietly. His gaze lingered on her face, searching, uncertain. Then he nodded once and turned toward the door. But before he left, he paused. "Granger." "Yes?" He hesitated. Don't let them break you." And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the dying fire and the terrifying realization that the boy she'd once sworn to hate was now the only person she trusted to stand beside her. The days that followed passed like the slow unfolding of a curse. Quiet, invisible, yet impossible to stop. Word of the mysterious note spread among the faculty, though no one could say who started it. Hermione found herself under closer watch than ever. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they multiplied, and still, Draco remained the only one who didn't look at her with suspicion. They met in hidden corners now, disused classrooms, empty corridors, the shadowed alcove behind the old tapestry of Morgan Le Fay. It was risky, reckless even. But each secret meeting tightened the thread between them, fragile and undeniable. That morning, she found him waiting for her near the astronomy tower, his cloak dusted with frost. He looked different in the pale light, sharper, colder, yet somehow human in a way she'd never noticed before. "You're late," he said, echoing his old tone, but the edge was softer now. "I had to avoid McGonagall," Hermione replied, drawing her cloak tighter. "She's begun keeping track of where I go." "Then you should have used the secret passage behind the charms corridor," he said. "You really are slipping, Granger." "Or maybe," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not as well versed in rule-breaking as you are." A faint smirk ghosted across his lips. "You're learning." He handed her a folded parchment. "I found this in the Slytherin common room. Someone tried to destroy it with a vanished charm, but I managed to recover the signature." She unfolded it. Runes scrawled across the surface, faintly glowing green, the same pattern from the forbidden ritual. At the bottom, one symbol burned brighter than the rest. "That rune," Hermione whispered. "It's not from the original text. Someone added it." Draco nodded. "And whoever did knew what they were doing. It's a concealment rune. It hides the caster's magical trail by transferring it to someone else." Her breath caught. "To me." "Exactly." She looked up at him, realization dawning in her eyes. This was deliberate. They didn't just want to get away with it. They wanted me blamed. Draco's jaw clenched. "Someone in this castle wants you ruined." The words hit harder than she expected. Maybe it was because of how he said them. Low, certain, protective. She met his gaze, and for a moment the frost in his eyes thawed. "Why do you care?" she asked softly. He hesitated. The air between them seemed to still. "I don't," he said finally, but his voice betrayed him. "I just hate seeing history repeat itself." The lie hung there, fragile and transparent. Hermione didn't press, though her heart ached with the weight of unspoken things. They spent hours tracing the rune sequence, comparing magical patterns. Draco's precision impressed her, his handwriting crisp, his logic sharp, his focus relentless. Gone was the arrogant boy she once despised. In his place was someone quieter, haunted, fighting ghosts only he could see. At one point, when their hands brushed over the same line of text, she noticed the small scar that ran across his wrist. Thin, silvery, almost hidden. "What's that from?" she asked before she could stop herself. He froze. "A mistake." "Yours?" "Someone else's," he said, and turned back to the parchment. She didn't ask again. By evening, they had narrowed down the possible suspects. Someone with advanced rune knowledge, unrestricted library access, and a personal reason to target Hermione. That list was painfully short. "Who would go to such lengths?" she muttered, pacing before the fireplace in the old classroom they used as their base. "It has to be someone with motive, someone who resents you," Draco finished. "That's half the school." She glared at him, but he wasn't wrong. He stood, walking closer. "Think, who could have gotten close enough to your wand to alter its trace?" Hermione's brow furrowed. "Only someone in the dormitory, or..." She stopped. "Or..." She hesitated. "Or someone in the library." Draco's eyes narrowed. "You're thinking of someone." "I don't know yet," she said, biting her lip. "But I'll find out." When she turned to gather her notes, she felt his gaze on her. Heavy, intent. "What?" she asked without looking back. He shook his head slowly. "You really mean it, don't you? You'd burn down the world just to prove you're right." Her voice softened. "I'd burn it down to be believed." Something flickered in his eyes then. Recognition, maybe admiration. It was gone as soon as it appeared. "Careful," he said, stepping closer, his voice low enough that she felt it more than heard it. "Once you start down that road, there's no coming back." "And you would know," she whispered. He didn't answer, but his silence told her everything. For a long moment, they stood there, too close, too aware. The firelight painted his face in shades of gold and shadow. She could see every line of tension in his posture, every battle he fought with himself. He exhaled sharply and took a step back. "We should stop meeting like this. People are talking." Let them talk, she said, before she could stop herself. His gaze snapped to hers, startled. I mean, she stammered, it doesn't matter. We're just trying to find the truth. But the words felt hollow, because the truth, the real one, was far messier than the investigation. It was in the way her pulse quickened when he spoke too softly, the way his eyes lingered on her lips when he thought she wasn't looking. She hated it. She hated him. She hated that she didn't. Tomorrow, he said finally, his voice rough. Meet me by the dungeons. I think I know who forged the rune. He turned to leave, but she caught his sleeve. The movement surprised them both. Draco, she said quietly. He froze at the sound of his name. Thank you, she whispered. For a heartbeat, something in him broke. The mask, the distance, the practiced indifference. His eyes softened, just a little. Don't thank me yet, Granger, he said. You might not like what we find. And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the fire and the sound of her own racing heartbeat. She stared at the door long after it closed, her mind a storm of confusion and longing. Every instinct told her to stop, to distance herself before it was too late. But she couldn't, because for the first time since the accusations began, someone stood beside her, someone who believed her. And the cruelest part of all, it had to be him. The air in the dungeons was thick with cold and the faint scent of damp stone. Hermione had always hated this part of the castle. Too quiet, too heavy, too steeped in Slytherin's legacy of secrecy. Yet now she found herself here, walking alongside Draco Malfoy, of all people, her footsteps echoing beside his. Neither of them spoke. Their breath came in small clouds, and every sound seemed to carry. She could feel his presence beside her like a pulse, calm, collected, and maddeningly unreadable. Finally, she broke the silence. You said you think you know who forged the rune. He nodded slightly, eyes fixed ahead. I'm not certain yet, but I have a lead. Who? A student, 7th year, sharp with runes, sharper with grudges. Names, Malfoy, she pressed. He smirked faintly, though there was no amusement in it. Patience, Granger. It's part of the charm of an investigation. She rolled her eyes. You're insufferable. And you're predictable, he shot back. But the words lacked venom. They were bickering out of habit now, the sharp edges dulled by something quieter, something that neither wanted to name. He stopped before an old stone archway hidden behind a tapestry of serpents. A faint shimmer rippled across the air. A ward. This is it, he said. Old alchemy storage. It's been sealed since the war, but someone's been in and out recently. Hermione studied the enchantment, recognition flickering in her eyes. This isn't a standard locking spell. It's ancient, modified Salazar wards. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Draco's lips curved slightly. Exactly. They exchanged a look, and for once there was no rivalry in it, only understanding. On 3? She asked. He nodded. 1, 2. They cast the counterspell together. The wards cracked open with a soft shimmer, revealing a room that hadn't been touched in years, or so it seemed. Dust floated through the air, but the center table was spotless, covered in runes drawn with silver ink that hadn't yet faded. Hermione stepped closer, her pulse quickening. It's the same script as before. Draco followed her in, eyes scanning the markings. And there, see the scorch marks? Someone performed a transfer spell here recently. Hermione crouched beside the runes, tracing the air above them with her wand. The magical residue is fresh, less than 48 hours old. So we're close, Draco murmured. Closer than we should be, she said. If they realize we've found this, they'll panic, he finished, meeting her eyes, and make a mistake. The corner of her mouth lifted. Good, I'm counting on it. He huffed softly, not quite a laugh, but close. You really do enjoy danger, don't you? Not danger, she said, standing. Justice. Something flickered in his expression at the word. He turned away quickly, brushing dust from his sleeve. You always were the noble one, weren't you? She looked at him, thoughtful. And you always pretended not to care. The words hung between them, sharper than either intended. He froze, his jaw tightening. Care gets you killed, he said quietly. Or it saves you, she whispered. Their eyes met, a collision of past and present, of everything they couldn't say. For one breathless second, the room felt too small for both of them. Then, as if pulled by an invisible force, he stepped back. We should go, he said, voice clipped, before someone finds us. Later that evening, she found him in the courtyard, leaning against one of the stone pillars, staring up at the night sky. The stars were sharp against the darkness, and his face was caught between light and shadow. You left before we finished cataloguing the runes, she said, walking up to him. I needed air, he replied simply. Since when does Draco Malfoy need air? He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Since he realized he's helping the Gryffindor Golden Girl clear her name. It's unsettling. She crossed her arms. You could stop. I could, he said, finally looking at her. But I won't. She frowned. Why? He hesitated, his gaze drifting back to the stars. Because you were right about one thing. I do care. Too much, maybe. The admission hit her harder than she expected. Her heart stuttered in her chest. Draco. He held up a hand. Don't. I'm not saying it for sympathy. He paused, his tone softening. When everyone turned on you, I remembered what it felt like. The stares, the whispers, the way the walls start to feel like a prison. I couldn't... He broke off, jaw tightening. I just couldn't watch it happen again. Hermione's throat tightened. For a moment, she saw not the arrogant Slytherin prince she'd loathed for years, but the boy who had been broken by a war neither of them had chosen. She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. You don't have to do this alone anymore. His gaze snapped to hers, startled, almost raw. Granger. But she didn't let him finish. You're not who you were, she said softly. And maybe it's time you stopped punishing yourself for it. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of winter and something unspoken. His expression changed, a flicker of longing, of resistance, of fear. Don't do that, he said roughly. Do what? Look at me like that. Like what? She asked, though she already knew. Like you see something worth saving. The words cut through her like a spell. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. Maybe I do. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The world around them seemed to fall away. No accusations, no secrets, no sides. Just the two of them standing in the cold, caught between what they were and what they could be. Then, as if the moment frightened him, Draco stepped back. You should go, he said, his voice strained. It's late. Draco, go, he repeated, softer this time. Hermione lingered, searching his face for something, anger, maybe, or regret, but all she found was exhaustion. Finally, she nodded. "Tomorrow, then." He didn't answer, only watched her walk away, her silhouette fading into the darkness. When she was gone, he pressed a hand against the pillar, his breath unsteady. He hated himself for what he felt, for the warmth creeping into places he'd spent years keeping frozen. Because he knew that if he let her in completely, she'd see everything. The guilt, the cowardice, the broken edges he'd spent so long hiding. And she'd see the truth he couldn't say aloud, that somewhere between suspicion and loyalty, he'd started to fall for her. But for now, all he could do was watch her go and whisper into the night, "Don't make me believe again." Inside the castle, Hermione climbed the stairs to her dormitory, her heart still racing. She told herself it was fear. Fear of what they'd find, fear of being betrayed again. But deep down, she knew it wasn't fear at all. It was something far more dangerous. Hermione woke before dawn, her mind already racing. The image of Draco's face the night before, that flicker of vulnerability, that quiet plea not to be seen, refused to leave her. She told herself to focus, to remember the real reason they were working together. But his words kept echoing in her head, winding themselves into places logic couldn't reach. She threw on her robes and slipped through the still sleeping castle. The corridors were washed in blue-grey light, silent except for the soft hum of the portraits stirring awake. Her steps led her to the dungeons almost without thought. When she entered, Draco was already there. He was sitting on one of the stone desks, his hair slightly disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. He looked up at her as though he'd been expecting her all along. "Morning," he said, voice low. "You didn't sleep," she observed. He gave a faint, crooked smile. "Neither did you." Hermione ignored that and set a stack of parchment on the table between them. "I've been cross-referencing the concealment rune with known magical forgeries. There are only a handful of wizards who've managed to replicate this level of precision. One of them teaches here," Draco finished, his tone grim. She nodded. "Professor Bletchley. He's been experimenting with rune manipulations since before the war." Draco leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You think he's involved?" "I think someone used his research. And we both know he's been mentoring advanced students this term. Any of them could have learned enough to forge the ritual." He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "Then we need proof, something solid enough to make the professors listen." "Which means," she said, meeting his gaze, "we break into his office." His mouth curved in a wry smirk. "I knew you were getting the hang of this." "Don't sound so proud," she muttered, but her heart wasn't in it. By nightfall, they were crouched outside Professor Bletchley's office. The corridor was empty, the torches dim. Hermione could hear the faint tick of the enchanted clock above the door. Draco knelt beside the lock, wand in hand. "Stand guard," she frowned. "You don't think I can handle a simple lock spell?" "Granger," he said, glancing up at her. "This isn't a lock, it's a sentient ward. It bites." Before she could reply, he whispered an incantation and traced a pattern in the air. The faint outline of a rune glimmered, then melted away. The door creaked open. Hermione followed him inside, her heart hammering. The room smelled of ink, parchment, and old smoke. Scrolls lined the walls, each sealed with a faintly glowing mark. Draco moved with practiced caution, scanning for traps. "Check the drawers," he said. I'll take the shelves. She obeyed, rifling carefully through stacks of parchment until something caught her eye. A silver rune disc, identical to the one they'd found in the alchemy room. Her breath hitched. Draco, she whispered. He was at her side in seconds. The light from the fireplace cast his face in sharp relief. That's it, he said, eyes narrowing. The same concealment sigil. It's still active. Hermione turned it over in her hands. The metal was cool, pulsing faintly with magic. This could prove everything. A noise in the hallway made them both freeze. Someone's coming, Draco hissed. Hermione's eyes darted to the door. The light beneath it flickered. Footsteps. Hide, he whispered. Before she could react, he caught her by the wrist and pulled her behind a tall cabinet. They pressed close together in the narrow space, the scent of parchment and his cologne filling the air. The door opened with a soft creak. Professor Bletchley's voice drifted in, calm, measured. Lumos. Light flared, spilling across the floor. Hermione's pulse thundered in her ears. She could feel Draco's heartbeat against her shoulder, steady and controlled, but his fingers tightened slightly around her wrist, a silent reassurance. Bletchley moved about the room, muttering under his breath. The light swept dangerously close. Draco's breath brushed against her ear as he whispered, "Don't move." The words sent a shiver down her spine. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the light dimmed. The professor left, the door clicking shut behind him. Hermione exhaled, her body trembling with relief, and something else she didn't dare name. Draco stepped back first, his expression unreadable. That was close. She nodded, trying to calm her breathing. Too close. Are you all right? I'm fine, she said, but her voice came out softer than intended. He studied her for a moment, his eyes flickering with something uncertain. Then he turned back to the desk. Take the disc. We'll analyze it tomorrow. She hesitated. We can't keep this from McGonagall forever. His jaw tightened. We can't go to her without evidence. Right now, you'd only give them more reason to doubt you. Her temper flared. You think I haven't thought of that? That I enjoy sneaking around in the dark? He faced her then, and his voice dropped. I think you'd do anything to prove you're innocent, and that's what scares me. She blinked, startled. Why would that scare you? Because I've been there, he said quietly. Because I know what it turns you into. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. His words cut through her anger, leaving something raw and aching behind. Draco, she began, but he shook his head. Let's get out of here. They left the office silently, the silver rune disc hidden in Hermione's pocket. The corridors were empty again, the castle sleeping around them. When they reached the stairs, Hermione stopped. You don't have to protect me, she said. I can take care of myself. He turned to her, eyes pale in the moonlight. I know you can. That's not the point. Then what is? His voice was low, almost a whisper. Maybe I just don't want to watch you destroy yourself the way I did. She froze. Before she could respond, he stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint scar beneath his jaw, the shadows of exhaustion in his eyes. You think I don't recognize it? That stubbornness, that need to be right. It's the same thing that ruined me. Her chest tightened. You're not ruined. He gave a small, bitter smile. You really believe that? Yes, she said, without hesitation. His eyes searched hers, as if looking for proof. Whatever he saw made his expression soften, just slightly. "Don't," he whispered. "Don't what?" "Don't believe in me." His voice cracked on the words. "You'll only get hurt." Hermione took a step forward. "Maybe that's my choice." He didn't move away. For a moment, she thought he might. But instead, he closed his eyes as though fighting something he couldn't win. When he opened them again, the walls were back in place. "Tomorrow," he said hoarsely, "we'll meet in the library." Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the dark. Hermione stood alone at the base of the stairs, her hand pressed against the pocket where the rune disc pulsed faintly, its rhythm matching her own heartbeat. She should have felt victorious, one step closer to clearing her name. But all she could think of was the way he'd said her name, the look in his eyes when he told her not to believe. And for the first time, Hermione wasn't sure if she was still fighting to prove her innocence or to save him from himself. The next day dawned brittle and cold, the kind of morning that made the castle feel more like a cage than a sanctuary. Hermione barely touched her breakfast. Her mind was too tangled, not only with the discovery of the rune disc, but with the memory of Draco's voice in the dark. "Don't believe in me." She had believed him anyway. By the time she reached the library, he was already there, leaning over an open book, the light from the tall windows tracing silver through his hair. He looked up when she entered, his eyes briefly meeting hers before darting back to the page. "You're late," he said, without real bite. "You're early," she countered, setting her satchel down beside him. A flicker of something, amusement maybe, ghosted across his face. "Couldn't sleep," he said simply. She opened her notes, her hands trembling faintly. "Neither could I." For a while, the only sound was parchment turning, quills scratching. It might have been like any other study session, except for the tension that hovered just out of reach, thin as spider silk, waiting to snap. Draco finally broke the silence. "I tested the disc last night." Hermione's head snapped up. "You what? Without me?" He didn't flinch at her tone. "I wasn't going to wait, and I was right. It's not just a concealment rune. It's a transference charm, designed to replicate magical residue and attach it to another person's spellwork." Her heart skipped. "So, it is how they framed me?" "Yes," he said, voice low. "And the caster left traces of their own magic behind. Faint, but there. Can you identify it?" He shook his head. "Not yet, but it's familiar." Hermione frowned. "Familiar how?" He hesitated, gaze flicking toward her. "Like I've felt it before, during the war." Something cold settled in her stomach. "You think it's someone who fought for Voldemort?" "I don't think," he said. "I know." She stared at him, trying to read the shadows in his face. He looked older then, older than 18, burdened by memories she couldn't touch. "Whoever it is," she said quietly, "they're here now, and they're not finished." He met her gaze. "Then we find them before they find you." Their eyes held for a beat too long, something unspoken passing between them, something that felt dangerously like trust. That evening, they followed the traces from the rune disc into the castle's lower levels, where the corridors turned narrow and the air smelled of stone and damp. Draco moved ahead of her, wand drawn, every step measured. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Hermione whispered. "I told you," he murmured back. "I can feel it. The magic's faint, but it's here." She didn't question it. She'd stopped questioning him days ago, a fact that terrified her more than anything else. They reached a narrow archway that led into an abandoned classroom. Dust coated the floor, except for a single line of fresh footprints leading to a corner desk. Hermione's pulse quickened. Draco motioned for silence, then moved closer. He touched the surface of the desk, and a faint shimmer appeared, a lingering charm. "Someone was here recently," he said. "A day, maybe less." Hermione stepped closer. "Can you tell who?" He closed his eyes, focusing. "No, but it's strong. Whoever it was, they've done this before." Before she could respond, the door slammed shut behind them. Hermione jumped, spinning around. "Draco!" He was already moving, wand up. "Protego!" A blast of light hit the shield, shattering it. Hermione ducked behind a desk, her heart pounding. A figure cloaked in black stepped out of the shadows, their face hidden by a hood. "You should have stayed out of this, Granger," the voice hissed. Familiar, male, but distorted by magic. Draco stepped in front of her instinctively. "Coward," he said coldly. "Show your face." The intruder laughed. "Still playing the hero, Malfoy. You're as pathetic as she is." "Who are you?" Hermione demanded. "Someone who remembers what you cost me," the man spat, lifting his wand again. Another spell shot across the room, purple light slicing the air. Draco countered it mid-cast, his movements swift, precise. Hermione joined in, her spell colliding with his in perfect synchrony. For a moment, the room was nothing but fire and noise. Then, silence. The attacker vanished in a whirl of smoke, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and ash. Hermione's knees buckled. Draco caught her before she hit the floor. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice tight. "No," she gasped, clutching his arm. "You?" "Fine," he said, though his hand trembled where it gripped her shoulder. He helped her stand, his touch lingering just long enough for her to feel the heat beneath his cold exterior. When their eyes met, she saw it again, the raw, unguarded fear. Not for himself, for her. "Whoever that was," she whispered, "they know you." He nodded once, jaw clenched. "I recognized the magic." "Who, Draco?" He looked away. "A name I thought I'd buried with the rest of them. Tell me." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Theo Not." Hermione's stomach twisted. "Not? But he was cleared after the war." "He lied," Draco said bitterly. "His father taught him the darker side of rune transference. If he's behind this, then he's been here the whole time," she finished. Their eyes locked again. "He wants you blamed," Draco said, "to make you suffer for what he lost." "And what about you?" she asked before she could stop herself. "What do you want?" His expression darkened. "I don't know anymore." For a long moment, the air between them felt charged, alive. She could feel the pulse of his magic, fierce, steady, pulling her closer. "Draco," she said quietly, "why are you doing this? Really?" He met her gaze, something breaking open inside him. "Because I can't stand watching them destroy you the way they destroyed me." Her breath hitched. He stepped closer until she could feel his heartbeat against her own. His eyes searched hers, full of the same conflict that had haunted her for days. And then he reached up, his hand brushing against her cheek. Just a touch, soft, trembling, gone too soon. "Don't look at me like that," he whispered again, almost pleading. "Like what?" "Like I could be something good." Her chest tightened. "Maybe you already are." He laughed quietly, a sound somewhere between disbelief and despair. "You have no idea what I've done." Then show me, she said, voice trembling. Let me decide. But he only shook his head. You wouldn't forgive me. She stepped forward, her fingers brushing his sleeve. Try me. He froze, and for one unbearable second, she thought he might give in. His gaze dropped to her lips, then flicked away, and he turned sharply toward the door. We're done for tonight, he said. It's not safe here. Draco. Tomorrow, he said, and left without looking back. Hermione stood in the quiet ruins of the classroom, her heart aching. Around her, the dust settled, and the silence closed in like a spell. He was slipping away again, hiding behind the same guilt that had nearly destroyed him. And yet, beneath it all, she could feel the truth pulsing like the rune in her pocket. He would rather burn than let her fall. And she was already too far gone to walk away. The castle felt colder after that night. The shadows stretched longer, the whispers sharper. Hermione could sense it in the hallways, the way people glanced at her and then quickly looked away, as if afraid to be caught caring. Word had spread again. Someone had seen her and Draco in the dungeons. She should have cared. She should have defended herself, explained everything, but all she could think about was the look on his face when he'd said, Theo not. The weight in his voice. The way his hand had trembled when it brushed hers. Now, sitting by the window of the library, she watched the snow drift past the panes and tried to pretend she was still the kind of girl who believed that logic could fix anything. But her thoughts kept circling back to him, always to him. Draco hadn't met her that morning. No note, no message, nothing. She told herself he was being careful, that he was tracking not, searching for proof. But a small, fearful part of her wondered if he was retreating, building his walls again. The sound of footsteps broke her reverie. She looked up just as he appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his cloak dusted with snow. Finally, she said, unable to hide the relief in her voice. Don't sound so happy to see me, Granger, he muttered, though his tone lacked its usual sting. She stood. Where have you been? Following a lead. And? He hesitated. You're not going to like it. Her stomach dropped. Tell me. Nott's been corresponding with someone inside the school, a professor. Hermione blinked. Who? He drew a folded letter from his pocket and handed it to her. The handwriting was elegant, neat, unmistakably familiar. She froze. No, it can't be. McGonagall, he said quietly. The name hit like a blow. You're wrong. I wish I were. The letter was in Nott's hand, sealed with her mark. They've been exchanging information about the ritual. Hermione shook her head. No, she'd never. She would, Draco interrupted, his voice steady but grim. If she thought it would protect the school, or if someone made her believe you'd gone too far. Hermione's breath caught. So she thinks I'm guilty. She thinks you're dangerous, he corrected. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. McGonagall, her mentor, the one person she thought might still believe her, and now even she was gone. Draco reached out, then stopped himself. I told you this would happen. People choose the story that hurts less. She looked up, her eyes bright with anger and grief. And what story do you choose, Draco? The one where you get to play the savior because it makes you feel less broken? His jaw tightened. You think that's what this is? Isn't it? She demanded. You're helping me because you see yourself in me, because saving me means forgiving yourself. His face hardened, but his eyes gave him away. And if that's true, she faltered, the fight draining out of her, then I don't know who you're saving anymore. Silence stretched between them, heavy and sharp. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the grounds in white. Finally, he spoke again, quieter this time. You need to disappear for a while. McGonagall's going to call the Aurors. Her chest tightened. You think I should run? I think you should survive. And you? She whispered. I'll stall them. Draco, no. He stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. Listen to me. If they find you, they'll arrest you first and ask questions later. I'll get the proof from Nott, and I'll clear your name. But you have to trust me. She stared at him, searching for any trace of deception, but all she saw was fierce, aching determination. Where do I go? She asked finally. The old observatory tower. No one goes there anymore. I'll find you before sunrise. Promise me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. His eyes softened. You really shouldn't ask me for promises, Granger. Do it anyway. He hesitated, then nodded. I promise. The tower was colder than she remembered. The air tasted of dust and forgotten magic. Hermione paced near the broken telescope, the wind howling through the cracked glass. Every sound made her flinch. She tried to focus on the facts, the runes, the evidence, the fragments of Nott's magic. But all she could think about was Draco. The way his voice had trembled when he said, "Trust me." It felt like hours before she heard footsteps climbing the stairs. Her wand was in her hand before she even realized it. "Easy," came his voice from the shadows. "It's me." Relief flooded through her. "You scared me." "You scare easily for someone so clever," he said, stepping into the light. But there was something wrong. He looked tense, pale, like a man who'd run through fire. "Draco?" she asked softly. "They know," he said. "McGonagall, she sent word to the Ministry. They're coming tonight." Her blood went cold. "Then we have to go now." He didn't move. "Draco, I can't go with you." "What?" "If I leave, they'll know I helped you. You'll never get away." Her throat tightened. "I don't care. I'm not letting you take the blame." He gave a small, hollow laugh. "It wouldn't be the first time." "Stop it," she said fiercely, stepping closer. "Don't you dare do this." He looked down at her then, eyes dark with something raw. "You don't understand. This is the only way I can make it right." "Right?" she whispered. "By sacrificing yourself. By proving that I can choose differently this time." Hermione shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "You're not him anymore. You're not the boy who stood on the wrong side. You're... Don't," he said softly. "Don't make me something I'm not." But she didn't stop. She reached for him, her fingers brushing the sleeve of his cloak. "You are Draco. You're better than you think, and I can't lose you." For a moment, he didn't breathe. Then, as if something inside him broke, he caught her hand and pressed it to his chest. His heart was pounding beneath her palm. "Then tell me how to stop," he whispered. She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "Stay." The word trembled between them, fragile and real. He leaned his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in the cold air. "You have no idea what you're asking." "Yes, I do," she said. "I'm asking you not to leave me alone in this." His fingers tightened around hers, a silent battle waging behind his eyes. And then, slowly, painfully, he let go. "I'll come for you," he said, voice rough. "But if they find me first..." "They won't," she cut in, fierce and trembling. Because I'll find you first." He almost smiled. "Always the Gryffindor." Then he turned toward the door, the wind whipping his cloak around him. "Draco," she said again, her voice breaking. He paused, looking back one last time. "Don't believe in me," he murmured. "Just don't stop fighting." And then he was gone. Hermione stood alone in the freezing tower, her hand still pressed to her chest where his heartbeat had been. She didn't know if she was shaking from fear or from the sudden, terrible certainty that she had just lost him, the one person who had chosen to believe when no one else did. Outside, the first aura lights flickered in the distance. Inside, the rune disc in her pocket glowed faintly, pulsing in time with her heart, the only proof she had left that he'd been real. The sky over Hogwarts was the color of ash. Wind tore across the battlements, scattering snow into spirals that dissolved before touching the ground. From the observatory tower, Hermione watched the storm gather. Below, torches flared as auras searched the grounds, gold light flickering against the white. She couldn't tell if they were hunting her or him. Every echo of boots on stone made her flinch. Every whisper of wind felt like a warning. Her mind wouldn't stop replaying that final look in his eyes, the one that said more than any words could. Don't stop fighting. She hadn't slept. She'd tried to plan, to think, to do something, but all her thoughts dissolved into one truth. Draco had given himself up to save her. Again, and she couldn't let him. By dawn, she had decided. She slipped through the castle's empty corridors like a shadow, the rune disc clutched tight in her hand. Its faint pulse kept her focused. Somewhere within that disc was the proof, the key to everything. She just had to find someone who could extract it before the auras reached him. The sound of hurried footsteps made her duck behind a pillar. Two voices drifted from the corridor below. "McGonagall wants the dungeons searched again." "Why? Malfoy's already in custody." Hermione froze. The words hit her like a curse. Custody. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Images flooded her mind. Draco surrounded by wands, silent and still, letting them take him because it meant she'd have one more hour of freedom. "No," she whispered, her heart pounding. "No, no, no." The auras turned down another passage. When their voices faded, she stepped out, her decision already made. She would not hide. She would not let him stand alone again. The Ministry's temporary outpost was set up in the old Charms classroom. Ironic, Hermione thought bitterly, that the place where they'd learned levitation now housed interrogation wards. The door was guarded, the air thick with magical interference. She waited until the guards changed shifts. Then she moved. It was reckless, foolish, the kind of thing she'd have scolded Harry and Ron for. But the thought of Draco sitting in that cold room, alone, accused again, it made reason impossible. She whispered a disillusionment charm, slipped through the door, and froze. He was there. Sitting at the center of the room, hands bound in magical cuffs that glowed faintly around his wrists. His head was bowed, hair falling into his eyes. But when she whispered his name, he looked up. "Hermione," he breathed. The sound of her name on his lips nearly broke her. "I had to come," she said. "Are you mad?" he hissed, though his voice was softer than his words. "I don't care," she interrupted. "You shouldn't be here. Not for me." He stared at her, disbelief warring with something warmer. "You're unbelievable." "Thank you," she said, with the ghost of a smile. He almost laughed. Almost. Then his expression changed. You have to go. They'll find you any moment. I have proof, she said quickly, pulling the rune disc from her pocket. The magic inside it. It's knots. You were right. I just need to show McGonagall. Draco shook his head. They won't listen. Knots already ahead of us. He's told them I helped you perform the ritual. They think I'm your accomplice. Her stomach twisted. That's not true. They don't care what's true, he said bitterly. They never do. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Then we make them care. He blinked, as if her certainty stunned him. You'd fight for me? After everything? She held his gaze. You fought for me first. Something flickered in his eyes. Shock, hope, fear. And for the first time, he looked younger, almost fragile. You're going to get yourself killed, Granger. Then at least we'll be even, she whispered. Before he could respond, footsteps echoed down the hall. Draco's eyes widened. Go. Now. She didn't move. Hermione, I'm not leaving you. Please, he said, and the word tore something inside her. If they catch you, it's over. For both of us. The desperation in his voice finally made her move. She reached into her pocket and pressed the rune disc into his hand. If they take me, finish it. Don't let them win. Then she leaned forward, so close their foreheads almost touched. I believe in you, she whispered. He looked at her like it hurt to hear the words. The door burst open. Hermione turned just as the auras stormed in. Spells flew. Blue, gold, blinding. Draco shouted something, but she was already raising her wand. Protego Maxima! The shield flared around them, crackling with light. For a second, it held, her magic burning bright and wild. Then a stunning spell hit, and the world tilted sideways. When she woke, the world was quiet. She was lying on a cot in a small cell, the air cold and damp. Her wrists ached. There were faint red marks where the cuffs had been. Across from her, through the iron bars, she could see another cell. Draco. He was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. When he heard her stir, he turned his head. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met, he said. Good, she rasped. You need someone stubborn on your side. Despite everything, he smiled. A tired, real smile. I told them it was all me, he said. Hermione's breath caught. You what? I said you tried to stop me, that you had no part in it. Her voice trembled. Why would you do that? He looked at her for a long moment and then said softly, because you deserve a world that still believes in people like you. She shook her head, tears pricking her eyes. And what about you? Who believes in you? He met her gaze. You do, and that's enough. Her heart clenched. It's not. The silence stretched between them, thick and aching. Then footsteps echoed again. The door opened and McGonagall entered, her expression grim but uncertain. Miss Granger, she said, we've examined the rune disc. It seems you were telling the truth. Hermione exhaled shakily. And him? She nodded toward Draco. McGonagall hesitated. We're still reviewing the evidence, but his cooperation speaks volumes. Hermione stood, gripping the bars. He didn't just cooperate. He saved me. He's the only reason you even looked twice. The headmistress's eyes softened, just slightly. Perhaps, but we must still follow procedure. When she left, Hermione turned back to Draco. They'll see reason, she said. He gave a faint smile. You really think that? I have to, she whispered. Because if I don't, what was the point of all this? He tilted his head, studying her. You still believe in happy endings? Not always, she said, her voice breaking. But I believe in you. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them hummed with everything they couldn't say. Finally, Draco leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Then maybe, he said quietly, that's enough to make me believe too. Hermione sat down opposite him, their hands pressed to the same section of cold iron, inches apart. The guards outside whispered. Snow kept falling. But inside those cells, something fragile and impossible began to bloom. A flicker of trust, of warmth, of love growing in the darkest place. And for the first time since it began, Hermione allowed herself to hope. Hermione lost track of how many hours passed in that dim, windowless cell. The walls bled grey light from the enchantments that kept them contained. No clocks, no books, no sense of time. Only the muffled footsteps of Aura's outside and the quiet rhythm of Draco's breathing in the cell opposite hers. Sometimes he was silent for so long, she thought he might be asleep. But she knew better. He didn't sleep. Neither of them did. She would catch him watching her through the bars when he thought she wasn't looking. And every time their eyes met, it hurt. Because there was no anger left between them now, only a terrible tenderness they couldn't act on. Hermione paced her cell again, her mind working through possibilities. There has to be a way out, she muttered. Some loophole, some counterspell. Draco's voice drifted across the narrow hall. You can't logic your way out of a ministry cell, Granger. Watch me. Always do, he said quietly. The words made her pause. She looked up, and for a long heartbeat, neither of them moved. His tone hadn't carried its usual mockery, only something soft, reverent, and unbearably sad. I'm not giving up, she said finally. I know, he murmured. That's why I worry. She pressed her palms to the bars. You're impossible. And you're predictable, he said, a hint of the old smirk ghosting over his face. We've been through this. But the momentary levity couldn't hold. They both knew what hung over them. If McGonagall couldn't convince the Ministry of their innocence, they'd be transferred to the holding cells in London. And once that happened, clearing their names would become nearly impossible. Hermione took a deep breath, forcing her thoughts to steady. When they bring food tonight, I'll distract the guard. You can... Stop, Draco said sharply. You're not getting yourself killed for me. Then what, Draco? She demanded. We just sit here and wait for them to decide who we are. You think the world will give you mercy because you surrendered? His expression darkened. No, I think it'll give you mercy because you deserve it. I don't. You still don't get it, do you? Her voice trembled. This isn't about deserving. It's about what's right. Right, he said bitterly. That word doesn't mean the same thing to me that it does to you. Hermione moved closer to the bars. Then let me teach you what it means. For a moment, the air between them pulsed with something unspoken. He looked away first, jaw tightening, his voice barely above a whisper. You should hate me. I did, she said, for a long time. And now? She hesitated. The truth hovered on the tip of her tongue, too fragile to release. Now, I just want you to stop punishing yourself. Draco laughed softly, a humorless sound. You really are extraordinary, Granger. You find something worth saving in everything, even in the wreckage. Maybe because I know what it's like to be one, she said quietly. He went still, the smirk fading. For a long time, there was only silence, thick and intimate, filled with the things neither dared to say. Then, suddenly, a voice echoed from the corridor. "Prisoner, transfer in 30 minutes." Hermione's heart stuttered. She gripped the bars. "No, they can't." "They can," Draco said flatly. "It's over." "No, it's not." Her voice broke. "I can't let it end like this." He looked at her, eyes full of quiet resignation. "You can't save everyone, Hermione, but I can save you." Before he could respond, footsteps approached. 2 auras entered, wands raised, unlocking Draco's cell first. Hermione pressed forward, panic clawing up her throat. "Wait," she said. "You can't take him. He's innocent." The older aura, a scarred man with cold eyes, ignored her. "Orders from the Ministry. The boy goes first." Draco stood, his posture calm but his knuckles white. "It's fine," he said softly. "Don't make this harder than it already is." "I can't just stand here," she cried. He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers one last time. "Then don't. Fight. That's what you do best." The auras seized his arms. She lunged for the bars. "Draco!" But he didn't resist. He just looked at her, a look that said everything words couldn't. "Don't follow me. Don't give up. Live." And then he was gone. The door slammed shut. The silence that followed was unbearable. Hermione pressed her forehead against the bars, her breath shaking. Tears she hadn't let fall before spilled freely now. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt utterly, hopelessly alone. Until a soft knock broke the silence. She turned. McGonagall stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Professor," Hermione said hoarsely, "please, you have to stop them." "I already have," McGonagall said. "The Ministry received new evidence from the rune disc this morning. It confirms everything. Nott's signature, his involvement, his correspondence with outside operatives. They've ordered Malfoy's release." Hermione's breath caught. "Then why?" "I sent word too late," McGonagall said quietly. "He's already on the transport, but I've arranged for him to be intercepted before they reach the Ministry." Hermione gripped the bars. "Let me go with you." McGonagall's eyes softened. "You've been through enough." "Please," Hermione whispered. "He'll think no one's coming." That, finally, broke the older witch's composure. "Very well, but you'll do exactly as I say." The snow had turned to sleet by the time they reached the forest edge. The carriage carrying Draco's escort was visible through the trees. 2 auras on either side, wands drawn. Hermione's heart raced as McGonagall whispered a disillusionment charm over them both. At her signal, they moved. It happened fast. A burst of light, a shouted spell, the crack of ice underfoot. The auras went down in a flurry of red sparks. Hermione barely registered McGonagall's precise wandwork. She was already running toward the carriage. The door swung open, and there he was, pale, disheveled, bound, but alive. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Granger!" "Come on," she said, fumbling with the bindings. "We don't have long." He stared at her as if she were a ghost. "You never listen, do you?" "Not when I'm right," she said breathlessly. McGonagall's voice cut through the storm. "Go, both of you. Get back to the castle before the others arrive." They ran. Snow crunched underfoot, breath visible in sharp bursts. Behind them, the shouts of pursuing auras echoed faintly, but Hermione didn't look back. When they finally reached the safety of the castle gates, they stopped, gasping for breath. Draco turned to her, disbelief etched across his face. You came for me. Of course I did. After everything. After everything, she interrupted. You're not alone anymore. He took a step closer, his breath still uneven. You should hate me. I told you, she whispered. I don't. Something in him cracked then, the last wall. He reached out, hesitating only a moment before his fingers brushed her cheek. You're either the bravest or the stupidest witch I've ever met. Maybe both. He let out a shaky laugh, one that sounded dangerously close to a sob. You should have let me go. Never, she said. Not again. The space between them closed slowly, naturally, as if it had been drawing them together all along. When he kissed her, it wasn't gentle or easy. It was desperate, trembling, full of everything they'd both been too afraid to say. When they broke apart, the storm had quieted. Hermione rested her forehead against his. Now, do you believe me? His voice was rough. I think I'm starting to. And for the first time, Draco Malfoy smiled like a man who finally believed he could be forgiven. They returned to the castle under the weight of silence. The storm had passed, but the snow still fell in thin, deliberate flakes, quieting every sound. Hermione could hardly feel her hands. Adrenaline had burned itself out, leaving only exhaustion and the sharp echo of what had just happened. The kiss that still lived on her lips, the way his trembling fingers had steadied her face, the impossible relief of knowing he was safe. They didn't speak as they slipped through the side entrance McGonagall had left unwarded. The corridors were empty, the portraits asleep. Only the flicker of torches lit their way, catching on the damp edges of Draco's cloak, on the curve of his jaw. Hermione led him into an unused classroom and sealed the door with a whispered charm. For a moment they stood there, catching their breath, listening to the sound of their hearts and the faint drip of melting snow. You're shivering, she said finally. He gave a weak laugh. I just escaped ministry custody, Granger. Forgive me if I'm not in peak form. She reached for her wand. Sit. Let me heal you. I'm fine. You're not. He hesitated as though he wanted to argue, but then he sank into one of the dusty chairs. The faint blue light from her wand brushed across his skin. The bruises at his wrists, the scrape along his temple. She tried to focus on the spell, not the way his eyes followed her, not the unspoken things swirling between them. Better? She asked when she finished. He flexed his fingers. Much, though I think you might have just glued my wrist together. She shot him a look, half amusement, half disbelief. You're impossible. Still predictable? She smiled, a real smile, small but alive. Completely. For a while, neither of them spoke. The quiet felt different now. Not heavy, not hostile, simply waiting. Hermione turned to the window, watching the moonlight scatter across the snow. What happens now? She asked softly. Draco exhaled slowly. Now? We wait for the ministry to confirm Nott's guilt. McGonagall said she sent the report. Once they verify the rune evidence, they'll clear your name. And yours. He looked down. That's different. No, she said firmly. It isn't. Hermione, he began, and she felt something in her chest twist at the sound of her name. They'll never forgive me, no matter what the truth says. Not fully, not after the war. My last name will always do half the accusing for them. Then let them, she said fiercely. Let them whisper. Let them doubt. You know who you are now. He gave her a long, tired look. And who's that? The man who believed in me when no one else did. His breath caught. He turned away as if the words were too much. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because you make me want to believe it," he said quietly. "And I don't know if I can live up to what you see." Hermione crossed the room before she realized she'd moved. "You already have," she said. He lifted his head. Their eyes met, hers fierce, his uncertain, and she reached out, brushing a lock of hair from his face. He didn't flinch this time. He only closed his eyes, like her touch burned and soothed at once. When he spoke again, his voice trembled. "You could have had anyone, someone clean, someone the world doesn't hate." "Maybe I don't care what the world hates," she said softly. "Maybe I just care about what's true." Draco opened his eyes. The guarded distance he'd carried for so long was gone. What replaced it wasn't arrogance or pain, but quiet wonder. The fragile kind of awe that comes when light reaches places it was never meant to. He stood, slowly, until they were inches apart. His breath mingled with hers. "I don't deserve you," he said. "No one ever does," she whispered, "when they finally love someone right." He froze. One heartbeat, two, then leaned in and kissed her. It was slower this time, deliberate. Not the desperate clash of survival, but the kind of kiss that came when there was nothing left to hide. His hand slid to the back of her neck, her fingers tangled in his hair, and the world narrowed to the space between them. Fragile, alive, infinite. When they parted, the air was trembling. She laughed softly, resting her forehead against his. That was reckless. He smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd ever seen from him. "You're a terrible influence." "Me?" "You've turned me into someone who hopes again." She wanted to tell him that hope wasn't a weakness, that it was the only thing that had kept her alive through every war, every loss. But before she could speak, the door burst open. McGonagall stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of sternness and relief. "You two have a talent for finding trouble." Draco straightened immediately. "Professor." She held up a hand. "Spare me. The Ministry has confirmed everything. Theodore Nott has been taken into custody. You're both free." Hermione's knees almost gave out. "It's over?" McGonagall's eyes softened. "For now, but I suggest you both rest, and perhaps learn to stay out of forbidden corridors." She left before either of them could respond, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. When the door closed again, Hermione turned to Draco. "Free," she said, testing the word. He let out a slow breath, like he was afraid it might vanish if he said it aloud. "I don't even remember what that feels like." "Then you'll have to learn again." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. For a moment, neither moved. The world outside the window was still, the snow soft against the glass. "I don't know where to start," he admitted. "Start here," she said. "With me." His fingers tightened around hers. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," she said with a faint smile. "But nothing worth doing ever is." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "All right, Granger. I'll try." "Good," she whispered, "because I'm not going anywhere." And for once, he believed her. They walked together through the empty corridor, the first light of dawn breaking across the snow. The castle seemed to exhale, as though it too had been holding its breath for them. Hermione glanced at him, at the way the pale light touched his hair, at the faint trace of wonder still lingering in his expression, and she realized that the boy she'd once seen as her enemy had become the only person she couldn't imagine leaving behind. He caught her looking and smirked faintly. "What?" "Just thinking," she said. "Dangerous habit." "About how strange it is," she continued, "that the only person who believed in me when I was accused was the one I used to hate." Draco's gaze softened. Maybe hate's just the first step towards something harder to admit. Hermione smiled. Maybe it is. They stopped at the grand staircase where their paths would usually part. The light spilled across the floor, golden and new. She could feel it, the shift, the fragile peace between them. "So," she said quietly, "what happens next?" Draco's mouth curved into the smallest, most uncertain smile she'd ever seen. "We find out." He offered his hand again, and this time she didn't hesitate. Together, they stepped forward into the light. The weeks that followed unfolded like a dream Hermione wasn't sure she could trust. For the first time since the accusation, Hogwarts felt like home again. The whispering had faded. Students smiled when they saw her now, though she could still sense the curiosity behind their eyes. But none of that mattered, because every morning when she walked into the library, Draco was already there. It became their unspoken routine. The quiet mornings by the far window, parchment and quills scattered across the table, books stacked like a fortress between them. To everyone else, it looked like they were simply studying, resuming the old rivalry that had defined their school years. But beneath the pretense, the truth was softer. Their hands brushed when they reached for the same ink bottle. Their glances lingered too long. Words carried weight that neither dared name aloud. Sometimes he would smirk at her in that infuriating way he always had, and she would roll her eyes. But then he'd look at her differently, with something almost tender in his expression, and her heart would forget how to stay steady. One morning, as the snow began to melt from the windowsills, Hermione caught him staring at her parchment instead of his own. "You're distracted," she said without looking up. "By your handwriting," he said, far too casually. "My handwriting?" "It's too neat," he said, twirling his quill. "Makes the rest of us look lazy." She smiled despite herself. "You never needed help looking lazy." His mouth twitched, the beginnings of a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You sound like McGonagall." "Someone has to," she said softly, and the light banter faded into silence. For a moment, he looked at her the way people look at things they never thought they'd see again. "Do you ever think about what happens after this?" "After Hogwarts?" she asked. "After all of it," he said, gesturing vaguely. "The war, the accusations, the parts of us we can't scrub clean." Hermione's throat tightened. "Every day. And I think we choose what comes next," she said. "We can't undo the past, but we can decide what we do with it." Draco leaned back, studying her. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she admitted, "but it's possible." He looked away, his fingers tapping against the table. "You really believe that?" "Yes," she said, with quiet certainty. "I believe in you." The words hung in the air. He stilled, as if they'd struck something deep and unhealed. "You shouldn't," he said finally. "Why not?" "Because you'll only end up disappointed." Hermione smiled faintly. "I haven't been yet." He stared at her for a long moment, then exhaled, shaking his head. "You're unbelievable." "You've said that before," she reminded him. "And it hasn't stopped being true." That evening, she found him outside near the Black Lake. The snow had melted into slush around the edges, and the water reflected the violet dusk. He was skipping stones across the surface, each one landing with a soft, hollow plunk. "McGonagall told me you refused the Ministry's pardon," she said, approaching slowly. He didn't turn around. "It wasn't a refusal, more like postponing the inevitable." "Why?" "Because I don't deserve it," he said simply. "People lost everything because of my family. I can't just walk away and pretend that's behind me." She stepped closer, her breath fogging in the cold. "Draco, the person you were forced to be isn't the person you are now." He turned then, his expression raw. "You say that like it's so easy to believe." "Because it is," she said softly. "For me." He laughed bitterly. "You really are incapable of giving up on people, aren't you?" She smiled faintly. "Only the ones who matter." The words silenced him. The wind stirred the water, carrying the sound of distant owls. For a moment, he seemed torn between speaking and running. Finally, he asked, "What do you see when you look at me?" She blinked, startled by the vulnerability in his voice. "What do you mean?" "Everyone else sees a Malfoy," he said. "A name, a mistake. I want to know what you see." Hermione hesitated, then answered truthfully. "I see someone who's learning how to be good, someone who's afraid of his own heart, and someone who doesn't realize how much he's already changed." He stared at her, his lips parting as if to reply, but no words came. Instead, he reached out, tentative, uncertain, and brushed his fingers against hers. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. It was something smaller, quieter, the beginning of understanding. Spring came slowly to Hogwarts. The snow thawed, the castle brightened, and the air filled with birdsong again. Life resumed its rhythm. Exams, Quidditch, laughter in the corridors. Yet something between them had shifted permanently. People noticed. Ginny's eyebrows had shot up to her hairline the first time she'd seen Draco and Hermione sitting side by side in the Great Hall. Even McGonagall had paused one morning, her mouth twitching suspiciously before she turned away. But Hermione didn't care. She had spent too long hiding behind what others expected. Now, when Draco reached for her hand in passing, she let him. When he muttered something dry and ridiculous under his breath, she smiled. There were still hard days, moments when guilt shadowed his eyes, when he withdrew into himself, unreachable. But Hermione had learned patience from the years of war, from her friends, from life itself. She stayed. She always stayed. One evening, near the end of term, they sat together by the fireplace in the empty common room. The flames cast gold across his face. "Do you ever wish it had been different?" he asked suddenly. "What do you mean?" "If we'd met before everything," he said quietly. "Before the sides, before the names." Hermione considered this. "Maybe, but then we wouldn't be us." He smiled faintly. "You think we were inevitable, don't you?" She leaned her head against his shoulder. "No, I think we're a choice." He was quiet for a long time after that. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "You make me want to be brave." She turned to him. "You already are." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his chest finally eased. The boy who had spent half his life running from himself was, for once, still. He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "If I hadn't believed you," he said softly, "I think I'd still be lost." "And if you hadn't believed in me," she replied, "I wouldn't have made it this far." The fire crackled softly between them, a warm counterpoint to the snow melting outside. When he kissed her again, it was slower than before. A promise this time, not a question. The world beyond the castle walls was still uncertain, full of trials and whispers and histories they couldn't erase. But here, in this moment, none of that mattered. When they parted, Hermione rested her hand against his cheek. "You once told me not to believe in you," she said. "I was an idiot." "Yes," she said, smiling through tears. "You were." He laughed, a sound so genuine it startled them both. Then she whispered, "But you're not anymore." And he believed her. Later, when she finally drifted to sleep in the soft glow of the dying fire, Draco stayed awake a little longer, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing. Outside, the first buds of spring were opening on the trees. He thought about what she'd said, about choice, about belief. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the boy defined by his mistakes. He felt like a man who'd been given a second chance, one he intended to keep. He leaned closer, brushed a kiss against her hair, and whispered, "Thank you, Granger, for everything." And in the quiet, he could almost hear her sleepy murmur in reply, gentle, certain, and full of love. Always. Summer unfurled itself over Hogwarts like a sigh of relief. The snow melted from the eaves, the air turned honey warm, and sunlight stretched lazily across the courtyard stones. The war, the accusations, the fear, all of it felt like a shadow slowly receding from their world. But for Hermione and Draco, peace wasn't a sudden thing. It was something they learned to build, piece by piece, as if repairing a spell that had been cracked too long. Every morning, Hermione would wake to the sound of birds at her window. She'd make tea, open her books, and find herself thinking about him. About the way his voice had softened when he spoke to her now, about the flicker of warmth behind every sarcastic remark. There were still moments she couldn't believe it was real, that the same boy who had once sneered at her in hallways was now the one she trusted more than anyone else. It didn't happen all at once. Trust never did. Some days, Draco would retreat behind that quiet, guarded look she'd come to recognize, the one that meant he was remembering. Regret came to him in waves, sudden and sharp. And though he never spoke of it, Hermione could see how heavily it still sat on his shoulders. But she stayed. When nightmares found him, she stayed. When whispers in the corridors reminded him of the name he bore, she stayed. And when he looked at her as though he couldn't quite understand why she hadn't left, she stayed. Because that was what love meant. Not blind forgiveness, but staying even when the past clawed its way back. One afternoon, they walked together along the edge of the black lake. The water shimmered like glass under the sun. Hermione skipped a stone across the surface. It made 3 soft ripples before sinking. "You're terrible at that," Draco said, his tone light. "I'm brilliant at it," she argued. "Objectively false." She shot him a look, her mouth curving. "Would you like to demonstrate then?" He bent, picked up a smooth pebble, and flicked his wrist. The stone skipped once, twice, then plunked into the middle of the lake. "See?" she said. "You're worse." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but at least I'm good at other things." "Such as?" "Surviving you." She laughed, the sound bright against the wind. "You make that sound like a challenge." "It is," he said softly, and when she turned to him, his smile was gone. There was something else in its place, something deeper, unguarded. They stood there for a long moment, the lake glittering beside them, the scent of summer grass filling the air. "I used to think love was weakness," he said finally, "that it made you vulnerable, that it took everything sharp out of you." "And now?" she asked gently. He looked at her, really looked, at her curls glowing gold in the light, at the strength in her eyes. "Now, I think it's the only thing that makes you brave." Hermione felt her throat tighten. "You always were brave, Draco. You just didn't know it." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You taught me, whether you meant to or not." She squeezed his hand in return. Then it was worth it. The last weeks of term came quietly. Exams passed, trunks were packed, and the castle hummed with the anticipation of summer holidays. For once, Hermione didn't feel restless. She felt still, content. Draco, however, was restless enough for both of them. She found him one evening in the library, pacing between shelves. The dying sunlight cast long bars of gold across the floor. "What's wrong?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "I got an owl from the ministry." Her heart stilled. "About the pardon?" He nodded. "They're offering me a position." "A position?" "As a consultant," he said, half smiling in disbelief. "Department of Magical Law Enforcement. They want me to help identify post-war curse residue in confiscated artifacts. Can you imagine? Me helping them clean up the mess I helped make." Hermione's breath caught. "Draco, that's ironic," he interrupted. "Redemptive," she corrected. "It's a chance to start over." He leaned against the shelf, arms crossed. "And what if I don't deserve to?" "You keep saying that," she said softly. "When will you start listening to the people who think otherwise?" He looked at her then, and something in his face shifted, a quiet surrender. "Maybe when one of them happens to be you?" She smiled, stepping closer until their hands brushed. "It already is." He didn't respond at first. Then he took her hand and kissed her knuckles. "You always win, don't you?" "It's not about winning. It always is with you." His voice softened. "But I don't mind losing anymore." The night before the Hogwarts Express was set to leave, they met again at the top of the astronomy tower. The same place their story had truly begun. The night she'd stood alone against the world, and he'd chosen, against all logic, to stand beside her. The stars spread wide above them, bright and endless. "Do you remember that first night?" Hermione asked quietly. "When everyone thought I was guilty?" He gave a low laugh. "I remember thinking you were too stubborn to ever be guilty of anything. And you were right." He tilted his head. "As usual." She rolled her eyes, smiling. "You're insufferable." He stepped closer, his expression turning serious. "Do you know why I helped you that night, Hermione?" She met his gaze. "Because you knew what it felt like." "Partly," he said, "but mostly because for the first time in my life, I wanted to believe in something good." Her eyes softened. "And now?" He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. "Now, I believe in you." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "You make it sound like I saved you." "You did," he said simply. "You just never noticed." She reached up, her fingers curling into his sleeve. "We saved each other." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of summer through the tower. They stood there in the starlight, the silence between them no longer filled with tension, but with peace. Draco's hand slid to her waist. "You know," he murmured, "I used to hate the way you said my name." "Why?" because it meant I'd done something wrong. And now? She asked, smiling. He leaned in until his breath brushed her lips. Now, I wait to hear it. Draco, she whispered. He kissed her, slow, deep, certain. It was no longer born from desperation or fear, but from something stronger. Choice, belief, love. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. You once said we were a choice, he murmured. You were right. I usually am, she teased, though her voice trembled with emotion. He laughed softly, the sound like sunlight breaking through clouds. Then here's mine. I choose you, Hermione Granger. Always. She smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. And I choose you, Draco Malfoy, even when it doesn't make sense. He cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing a slow circle there. You're the only thing that ever has. The stars blazed brighter above them. Somewhere in the distance, the clock tower chimed midnight. Hermione leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. For the first time since the war, since the world had torn itself apart, she felt whole. Maybe they'd never have a simple life. Maybe the world would always remember their names with a question in its tone. But here, in this moment, none of that mattered. He had been the enemy once, proud, cold, unreachable. And now he was the only person who had ever seen her completely, who had believed in her when no one else did. And she, who had once sworn she could never forgive him, could no longer imagine a world without him. When they finally walked down from the tower, hand in hand, the sky was paling with dawn. The war was over. The accusations were over. But the story between them was only beginning.
To believe in a person and to trust a person is a good road. Is a road you can walk together for a very long time. This is what I was thinking about during the story. A familiar format of stories about the characters we love and we use it to can sometimes feel like a breeze of fresh air. And if you breathe it in together with me, I would be very happy.